Yo, so today I'm going to be breaking down a simple, bouncy, ethnic melody and then throwing some drums on it at the end. Alright, so the first sound we started off with is a mallet from one of Shark's one-shot kits. It's called I Don't Know Anymore. And it's just a really solid, dry-sounding mallet that sounds really good when you put a lot of effects on it. And then here's the main MIDI for the melody, and it's pretty simple. It's pretty much just this one-bar arpeggio that repeats throughout the whole thing, with just slight variations in the ending, and then transposing the whole thing up 5 and down an octave here. So if I were to make something similar, I would go up here and make sure I'm in the third step, snap to grip, and then just make a normal triad. And then we can just go ahead and offset everything. And then just kind of fill in the top notes with what sounds right. So that sounds pretty good. And then we can just go ahead and slice off the end and then delete that and copy it over. And then we're going to offset the bass note and then add a little filler note down here. So I'm just going to grab this A sharp and just put it down here and then lower the velocity. And that's pretty much the whole melody, and then this just gets copied over, and then there's some other variations here, like this goes here. So yeah, and then that just gets copied over and the voicing changed. But then for the final melody, I ended up pitching it up to G minor, so it's just a little bit more high pitched. And then for the effects on that, I went ahead and added supermassive on the default preset with the mix turned way down, another supermassive on the dark horse preset, again the mix turned down, portal on the sandbox preset, and it's in the stretch and smear section, and then the mix on this is also turned down, a halftime on the half preset with the mix turned down to 60, an EQ just to get rid of some of the highs, an EQ just to cut some of the lows, and then an imager just to kind of make it a bit more mono. So after all those effects, here's what it ends up sounding like. So overall, it's just a really simple textured mallet pattern. And then I also have a version of this that's pitched up an octave just for some variation in the arrangement. And then for the next sound in the melody, it's the delay time mallet from Flowers Volume 1. I really like to use this as like a bass accent mallet, so that's what I used it for here. And then here's the MIDI for this, so it just follows the bass line, and I have the first note offset a little bit, just so it sounds a little bit more interesting than just hitting on the 1 and 2 like an open hat would. But then I also have these two little accent bits to kind of end it off and then spice it up a little bit. Overall, it's a super simple pattern that just kind of sits in the back and makes it sound a little bit more interesting. So here's what it sounds like. And then for the effects on that, I have finisher micro on the infinity preset turned down about 3/4 of the way, a love filter with the cut knob turned to here, and then also the mix knob turned down just a tiny bit, and then just an EQ to cut out all the lows. And then for the next sound, I went ahead and went into Omnisphere and grabbed this ethnic guitar from Ethnic World. I'm not even going to try to say that, but it's probably one of the best like ethnic guitars in Omnisphere. Alright, and then here's the MIDI for this. So as you can see in this first half is the exact copy of the mallet pattern. And then in the second half, I just took all the notes from this and stacked them into chords, just so there's a section that's a little bit more laid back and there's a little bit more room to do something else with the melody. And then for this MIDI as well, I have two versions of it. So one is quantized like this, and then one I went through and held Alt and kind of dragged around the notes a little bit. And this is because I did the double tracking thing that I did in the last video, where there's two different timed guitar melodies, so they're a little bit off from each other and they're panned to opposite ears, and it just makes it sound really full. And then for the effects on that, I've taped cassette 2 with the wow and flutter turned up, reverb just on the default preset, magic switch turned about halfway down, and this only happens on one of the guitar renders, a EQ just to cut out all the lows, and then an imager again just to kind of make it a little bit more mono. And then like I mentioned before, I did the same double tracking thing, so the left one is panned at 55% to the left, and then the right one is panned 55% to the right, so they just kind of sound cool when like the different notes are bouncing off each of your ears at different times. So here's what it sounds like. All right, and then for the last sound besides the basses, it's the vibey mallet from, again, Flowers Volume 1. And then I have the envelope turned like this so it hits hard and then there's a little bit of a fade off. Overall, this is just my favorite mallet one shot that I found. All right, so here's the MIDI for this, and the first part to start off with was this, which I just clicked in by ear. Then I went ahead and added in bass notes, so the G and the C that are both in the main mallet melody. Then I went ahead and added these rolls, which are just the notes next to each other in the scale, A sharp and A. And those notes next to each other in the scale always kind of tend to give off a more dark feeling, so I like to use them in dark and ethnic melodies. And when you're working with really fast rolls like this, I always find it's nice to automate the velocity, so it's just a little bit more interesting and not just a stagnant thing. So if you want to do something like that, how it's so even, you'd select the notes that you want to roll and then just drag down holding right click so everything's really nice and even. And then in the second part, it's pretty much the same thing, but I went ahead and added more rolls in here just to make it a little bit more busy and interesting, along with this little part at the end that just kind of leads nicely into dropping back down to G. And then for the effects on that, I have lo-fi space just on the default preset, and I believe this is a free plugin, and I have the mix turned down pretty much all the way, and then an EQ to kind of fade out of the lows and cut some of the highs, and then a pancake just on the default preset with the mix turned down to 74. So after all that, here's what it sounds like. So overall, it's just a nice simple pattern that overall just kind of adds a lot to the melody. All right, and then for the last sounds in the melody, it's two basses. One of them is a boo bass, which is a stock acoustic bass that comes with FL Studio. And then the other one is a Oracle bass from Serum, and it's from the Stardust Serum Bank. Overall, I've been liking using two basses and kind of trying to mesh them together. Usually gives off a pretty interesting feel. So for the acoustic bass pattern, I just have it hitting on the root notes, and then this copies where it dips down in the melody in the mallet pattern, and then just a little triplet roll to end it off, and then the same thing here, but just transposed to the right bass note. And then for the Serum bass MIDI, it's just the same thing pretty much, just using the bass note, but then I left these gaps in between because it wasn't like a real punchy bass, it's just kind of like a stagnant sub bass. So I wanted some breaks in there so it kind of feels like it's hitting again and again, just to kind of give it a little bit more energy, I guess. But overall, just a super simple pattern. And then for the effects on those, on the Serum bass, I just have an EQ to kind of cut all the highs. And then on the acoustic bass, I did pretty much the opposite, so it cuts all the lows and just keeps like the mid to highs. So after all those effects and combining them and everything, here's what it sounds like. All right, so those are pretty much all the main sounds in the melody, but then I added 3 textures or like drum loops kind of thing. So the first one is a drum and texture that I made that's going to be in one of my upcoming kits. And then the next one is the same thing as well. And then the final one is just an accent from Flowers Volume 1. So here's what it sounds like when you put them all together. So those textures just really make it a little bit more interesting and give it a little bit more texture. But once you put everything together, here's what the final melody sounds like. Alright, so yeah, that's pretty much it for the melody, and now we can go ahead and get started on the drums. yeah, so that's going to be pretty much it for the video. I'm pretty happy with how the drums turned out, but I think after this, I'm going to duplicate the 808 pattern and just make one that's a little bit more simple for some parts. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. Have a splendid rest of your day. Bye.